Behind the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, stronger growth prospects for sub-Saharan Africa, but a big trade challenge is looming. The Monetary Fund upgraded its growth outlook for sub-Saharan Africa in 2019, citing a recovery in Nigeria. Africa's most populous country is recovering from its worst contraction in a quarter of a century. That's thanks to rising prices for commodities like oil. And there's a positive contagion effect. In an update to its World Economic Outlook report, the IMF said the sub-Saharan region as a whole now is expected to grow 3.8% in 2019. Now that's up 0.1% compared with April's forecast. But there was also a warning about the impact of tit-for-tat tariffs.
The United States has initiated trade actions affecting a broad group of countries and faces retaliation or retaliatory threats from China, the European Union, its NAFTA partners, and Japan, among others. Our modeling suggests that if current trade policy threats are realized and business confidence falls as a result, global output could be about 0.5% below current projections by 2020.
China relationship is at its lowest level since the two countries established a diplomatic relationship with each other. We are on the verge of a very substantial trade war with each other. One way to think about trade war is an escalation of imposing tariffs on goods. A trade war is going to affect America and Americans in some very tangible ways. The most immediate effect is when we go shopping. We're going to see a rise of prices in day-to-day products. Right? If you buy a shirt, if you buy a pair of shoes, socks, a lot of those things are produced in China.
Africa plays a key role in Xi's Belt and Road Plan. China is Africa's largest trading partner. If Chinese-made products are hit with US tariffs, there could be a knock-on effect. Africa's share of global exports is low, making up just 2.4% of total global exports. 2/3 of sub-Saharan imports are finished products. Products shipped out to the rest of the world are dominated by raw materials. Africa's current internal trade is low too.
Bloomberg.
Thank you very much for having me.
The world has a lot of challenges. What is your main challenges for your country and your continent?
I think the two are interlinked. It's basically how we can develop the economies of our country to provide a more dignified standard of living for the mass of our people. That's our main concern, how to develop our economies. We're sitting on all the resources of the world, and yet we are the poorest people on the globe. So how to, as it were, remove that disconnect? That really is a function of leadership in Africa at the moment. That matters as true for Africa as it is true for my country. I give you a simple example. Côte d'Ivoire and ourselves, between us, we produce 60% of the world's output of cocoa. 2015, the returns to us, 2 billion to Ghana, 3.75 billion to Côte d'Ivoire, 5.75 billion amongst us. The global chocolate market is of 100 billion plus. So you're looking at a situation whereby the farmers who produce get something like 5 to 5.5% of the global value chain of their product. something's not right there. We need to do something about it.
What can you do? Do you need to renegotiate with the big suppliers, with the makers of chocolate?
I think that we have to perhaps make the chocolate ourselves. We have to find a way of being able to connect the raw material to the finished product, because that is where the value is. And so far, we've been either out of negligence on our part, or the difficulties of mobilizing the finance and the technology. We've not been able to do it. I think that this generation of African leaders, these are the issues that we have to look at. We have a globalized trading system that frowns on protectionism, and quite rightly, I think that all of us are in agreement that as a general principle, free trade benefits everybody in it.
So when we look at the South African wine export industry, how is it going to be affected if the import tariffs are increased on them?
So the South African products to the US are governed by AGOA. AGOA is not necessarily a trade agreement, but it is a developmental aid policy from the US by the US government since around about 2000, the year 2000. And we can see from data that since that time there's been an increase in the value of exports to the US, not just from South Africa, but from all the AGOA qualifying countries, which is about 44 countries in Africa. So the US uses this tool to ensure that the countries reciprocate by opening up markets, by adhering to democratic rule, and ensuring that kids go to school. So it is really more of a developmental aid as opposed to a trade agreement. But if we were to lose that, because it is not fair to US producers, as we know about the story about the meat producers in the US that have accused South Africans of blocking US imports into South Africa. AGOA, in a sense, allows for South African products to go into the US duty-free, whilst American products come into South Africa facing tariffs, most favored nation tariffs as established by the WTO. So losing the AGOA for South Africa would have significant impacts in terms of the exporting industry, in terms of values there, in terms of the people who are employed in the sectors that would be affected. Grapes, for example, is linked to wine tourism, to wine exports into the US. Around about 300,000 people are employed, especially in the Western Cape, in this sector. And our simulation shows that if AGOA were to be removed, about 5% on average of tariff would be imposed on South African products.
Mm-hmm. So now how will the sustainability of AGOA really be carried out? Because when you look at the hardline stance of the US ever since President Donald Trump took over, I mean, he has, for example, withdrew from the 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership, and as well as terminating, or rather is threatening to terminate, the participation in the North American Free Trade Agreement. So where does this put African countries in terms of uncertainty and unpredictability in as far as this protectionist stance is concerned?
Yeah, so that's probably one of the reasons that motivated me specifically to look at what the impacts could be if the current U.S. administration were to go ahead and remove AGOA from, especially South Africa, because sometimes we regard it as a developed country as opposed to a developing country. So your question is how much of a threat the AGOA is. First of all, AGOA is going to expire in 2025 unless it is renewed, and it was renewed in 2015. So there is a date for it to expire. So as South African policymakers, we need to be thinking what we need to be doing beyond AGOA in 2025 when the agreement itself expires. But if It so happens that before then it is removed by the current EU administration. We need to think about what the impacts would be. About 5%, 5 to 7% of South Africa's exports currently go into the US. So in a sense, we are lucky. It's not a very big number. The EU still remains our biggest recipients of our goods. And China has been growing in the last 15 years. So the more we diversify our markets, it is a very good development that last year the Africa Free Trade Agreement was signed, with the exception of Nigeria. That has opened up markets for South African producers so we need to be thinking about how we're branding, including wines, into these countries, that in case AGOA was threatened and removed, would still be having access to the market.
Just your parting shot, given that most of the decisions that are about AGOA are slanted against the African countries, and the US actually has the upper hand as far as making decisions on the trade deals that are concerning the sector-specific arrangement. What about the issue of the equilibrium stimulation that is stated in the research that you are conducting? Are we ever going to see the playing field being leveled to benefit countries equally?
So in all negotiations, really it's about bargaining power. I mean, when you go to the WTO, who's got the biggest power normally gets the biggest share of the negotiation results. So sometimes African countries come together and they have representatives that represent them in the trade negotiations. But currently the US is a big player in the market, and therefore most of the deals that are being struck often benefit the US. And China is growing. It means that it will have a biggest leverage because, for example, if when this trade war between Trump and China, for example, is playing out, who loses the most is the most likely person to come to the table for reconciliation. So unfortunately, African countries at the moment are, as you say, really at the mercy, especially because this AGOA is not really a trade deal, it's actually developmental aid. It's a gift from American people to Africans to ensure that they develop, but they've got all the list of requirements that they want us to comply with.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for making time to speak to us.
Sure, thank you, sir.
Welcome back. The US has suspended duty-free access to Rwandan textile import from Rwanda under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. The U.S. Trade Representative's Office review was in response to a complaint by the U.S. textile industry over a decision by 3 East African nations, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, to ban importation of used clothes and shoes. Here's a report with John David Mahamli.
From threats to action. U.S. President Donald Trump finally, on the 29th of March, implemented his decision to suspend trade benefits for Rwandan products entering the United States. This was a result of pressure from the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textile Association, SMART, which complained about substantial increase in the cost of custom duties on American clothing sold to Rwanda. In June 2017, President Paul Kagame noted that the country would have to choose to either be a recipient of second-hand textile or to develop its own industry. He said Rwandans are entitled to new clothing, even if it's at the expense of a trade deal with AGOA. Rwanda is under pressure as an economic pan-African advocate, but the Rwandan government says it will not change its decision on second-hand clothing. Nonetheless, the trade balance between the United States and Rwanda pleads in favor of Kigali. In 2017, Rwanda exported $2.16 million to the United States compared to $460,000 the previous year. Its imports in 2017 are valued at $130,000 compared to $330,000 in 2016. Uganda and Tanzania, the other 2 members of the East African community, backed out at the last minute.
Did you correctly? So 80% of our exports under AGOA are linked to cars. So we're talking about AGOA, all the benefits that we've had in the past basically being wiped out.
That is the main concern, that if you look at autos, they account for a significant portion of our exports under AGOA. So it's a key concern for us And there are not a number of countries that are able to export diversified products into the U.S. market. And one of the key objectives of AGOA was to assist African countries to diversify their market base and also exports into the U.S. market. So the concern was raised by the African trade ministers that if you look at the products that are affected by the Section 232, it's value-added exports, then the impact of this is likely to be that African countries that are benefiting under AGOA will mainly be exporters of primary products, and this will not contribute to the broader development objectives of the region in terms of diversification and industrialization.